I would advise anyone who likes to get away from the city life, find yourself a small town somewhere. And it takes a while to get into this small town. It takes to be accepted, but you go through that and things work out pretty good. I was born in Altadena, California in 1931. And we moved to Oregon when I was 3 years old onto a homestead, and discovered at that age that that was the life I wanted. For some reason it hit me right away. This is the way to live. Out in the country, away from the city noises and away from the city life. And that has followed through all of my life. Somehow, in the process of growing up, got drafted into the military in 1952 and got married about the same year, and that was a real thing for me to go from the freedom that I'd always lived working on ranches and living out to be in the military. That was during the Korean War, and survived the 2 years in the military, and have pursued the ranch life all of my life. Partly because to live on a ranch, you have to use your own wit to survive. It's not, nothing's handed to you. You have to make it work. And being married to the good woman that I've been married to for almost 61 years now, has made it so it works. And she has gone along with my idiosyncrasies about living in the open, in the country, and it has worked for us. We do the cowboy thing here at the ranch, and I build wagons full time. Live as close to the 1800s as I can live in these days by building wagons and having horses here on the ranch, and all the things that went into the life in the 1800s has worked well for us. We do these cowboy music and poetry things here, and it has been a rare find that people really like this thing that we do, and our audiences are good, and they're with us when we're doing it, and that makes such a difference. And here I am at the age 82, thinking I am one of the fortunate people who have all my life done what I was made to do, what I was as a child thought this is what the goal that I've always had, and has always followed through on it. And how many people I have talked to that haven't found at an age of 20, 25, 30, 50 what they really wanted to do. And for some reason, I was lucky at an age in my first memories that this is the life I dearly love, and it has followed through all these years. And to move to a small town like we did, we moved here in Fiddletown 40 years ago. And if you weren't born here, you were called a flatlander, and we survived all the stuff that moving to a small town. About 100 people live here in this town. And to be able to survive moving into an area where no one really wanted to see a new face, and here we are after all these years, finding that it was worth the effort to move here and to live here.
What did you do to buy the ranch? What was your profession?
Well, before I came here, I run a horse club down in Fallbrook, San Diego County, Southern California, for quite a few years, and had a lot of kids that I put together, and we would go camping trips on horseback. And I told Marie, my wife, I said, if this town starts to grow and need a signal light in town, we're going to sell the ranch and get out of here. Well, that's exactly what we did, because they got their first signal light in town. That was the mark that I kept during that time. And we had been, I had designed and built a frontier town for a guy that we lived closer. On the weekends we'd come up into this gold rush country, and I fell in love with this area. The stories that went with the gold rush, and the time, and still the feelings, still some of the old mining frames around this country. Well, that gets you a little closer to the 1800s, which I found myself addicted to that era. And so we found this area. In fact, we drove into Fiddletown. We were starting to look for property up here, and there was no one in town except there was a pickup truck with a horse trailer parked across from the general store. At that time, the general store was open as a store, and there was a saloon was open as a working saloon. And I thought, this is the place. And fortunately, my wife went along with it, and we started looking for property and found this place, this ranch up here. There was nothing here. It was all open range cattle. An old cowboy named Dode Hex ran cattle in this open range. And we bought we have 45 acres in here, and made it into what we have now as a sort of looks like an old frontier town up here, and I surrounded myself with the era that I fell in love with as a child. And now I build wagons full time. We put on these cowboy entertainments, and it has worked for all these years, and hopefully you can keep doing it, because it's very satisfying to be able to have people come up here and share what we've done here, and it has worked out really well. And my 2 years in the military back in the 50s was hard, because I come off of a ranch where I had all the freedom a guy could ever ask for, and all of a sudden here I am in the military, which changed everything. But that was a good thing in the long haul, because that changed the direction of my life to where I had to get further out than I even thought I had to be. And that's what people come up here at the ranch and they said, "How did you ever find a place so far away from humanity?" And it's really not that far away, but that's the way they see it. If they come right out of San Francisco or Los Angeles, it's they comment on how quiet it is, and almost like it bothers them, the quietness. And the noise is what bothers me. If I drive down to Sacramento, which I have to do about once or twice a year to get wood for the wagons that I do, and I find myself saying, Tom and I drive down, my son Tom, and I find myself saying, how do people do this? How do they do this? So that's the opposite. They come up here and say, how do you do this with the quiet? And I go, how do you do that with all the signal lights and the traffic and the noise and all that? So we adapt to what makes it work for us, and that's what's always done for me. So I've been fortunate that way. No, I never did. I've never worked for anybody else. I've pretty much worked for myself.
Okay. Were you a contractor, or what?
Nope. I used to put in irrigation systems when they were planting avocados down in Fallbrook, where I came from.
Okay.
That's the only time I've really worked for someone else. I worked on different ranches, cowboying and different things like that for periods of time, but that was always kind of there's a certain amount of freedom that works when you're living that way. You're still under somebody else's control to a point, but you have the day to work cattle or whatever it is you're working on. And so it's never been, well, I've never actually had a firm that I've worked for or anything that much controlled. And I think that's what has made it work for me, because I have to have that certain amount of freedom of make it work for myself. Whatever it takes. Use your own wit to make it work. And I started building wagons about 35 years ago, I guess now, or 30 years, somewhere in there. And when it comes to building wagon wheels, the people ask me, who taught you how to do that? I said, nobody. I just took an old wagon wheel apart, made my mistakes, and figured it out. Well, I'm fortunate in the way that if I don't know how to do something, when I go to bed at night, I dream what tools I need to make, what I have to do. It's a gift, I guess, that I'm fortunate, because if I don't know how to do something, I get a mental picture in that, what I call the twilight zone, somewhere between 1 and 1:30, 2 o'clock, when I'm not really asleep, not really awake, but I go to bed with that on my mind. Well, how am I going to make this work? And I'll get this picture somehow. And if I get it that way, it always works. I don't know how that works, but it does.
So you were self-taught in
Yeah,
painting,
yeah.
too, right?
Yeah, I would, for instance, here's an example. When I was the first wagon wheel I built was a large freight type wagon wheel. It's a two-man job really, but I didn't know that at the time. So I'm out here working out here in the blazing sun like I always do out here in the barnyard, and I got to a point where I kept walking away from this wheel and I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'd go around the circle around the wagon wheel, come back and work on it some more. And finally I decided about going to the house to get a drink of water because it was really hot. As I walked under this big oak tree here in the front yard, I got a mental picture of the tool I needed to make that work, to pull these spokes over and line them up. Went in the house, got a drink of water, went on the blacksmith shop and made the tool. I had a big old, for the leverage part, I had a big wooden spoke, big hickory spoke, and then I forged the iron part and hinged it on the spoke. Made the tool without ever having seen it. And then, several months later, I was going through some books, and I found that tool. I'd never seen it, but I made it exactly like it was, like the blacksmith used. And I thought, okay, where does this stuff come from? Is there stuff in your memory? We get a lot of things through our genes. Do we get memory, gene memory, from somebody in my past who was a blacksmith?
You're channeling.
Channeling, yeah. Or have I been here? Have I been here before?
Yeah.
And I never really thought that much about it until I started doing things that I didn't know the answer to until I would either get it in the night or I would get this mental picture as I'm, in this case, walking under this oak tree in the shade. Went on and got that and come out and made the tool, and I finished the wheel. Russell. I was about 13, 14 years old, and I was in the school library, and I pulled his book out and I had Charlie Russell's. I'd never seen any of his work before, and had photographs of some of his paintings, and I thought, because of it's the cowboy life and all the things that went with Charlie Russell's artwork, which was the life I dearly loved as a kid. And there's this book of Charlie Russell, and I thought, oh, and I was an artist. I was painting at the time, starting to as a kid. And I thought, well, if I could just paint like Charlie Russell, oh, this would be the life. So I took to it very seriously. Took art classes in school, but at that time, modern art was the thing to do. And here I am in this art class doing horses and cattle and wagons and stuff like that in these paintings, and the teachers didn't like it because they wanted a great big canvas with a black stripe, a red circle, a white stripe, and a line going across, and that was art. And to me it wasn't art, it was very simplified putting color on a piece of canvas. And I wanted to draw horses like horses really are, with the bone structure and all the stuff that goes with artwork as a Western artist. And because Charlie Russell and Frederick Remington were very much in my mind at those times, I thought, oh, this is the way I want to paint. So I worked at it real hard. I'd take the horses out, get all duded up in my cowboy gear, and the other kid and I were two artists that wanted to be artists. So we'd take the horses out and set up a scene and then photograph it and go home and paint this best we could. And that taught us how to put color down on canvas, and how cool colors like blue and green stay back, warm colors, red and orange and brown, come forward, so that you get distance in a painting by using color. Learned all this stuff by looking at Charlie Russell's, particularly his stuff.
Yeah, I forgot about Frederick Remington.
Oh yeah, but he was an Eastern artist. He would come out to the West and sketch ideas and go back to his studio in, I think, New York. There was nothing wrong with that, but he didn't live the life like Charlie Russell did. He actually was a wrangler on different big ranches. That was his thing, to be a wrangler. Work with the horses. And he lived the life, and he saw these things of a cow with a calf, and this guy's roping some cows, and this calf gets between the mama cow and the calf, and the mama cow and she comes in and belly horns one of the horses that the rider's on. So he saw this stuff happening. Unless you've lived that life, you wouldn't know that these things happen. So he could get this down on canvas in such a beautiful way that he got the picture, really well done. And of course, Remington did a good job too. But his horses are mostly all cow-necked, which means they're. You look at some of the Indians on their cow, the neck dips down instead of going like this. It would dip down. They call it cow-necked. And so he did some good stuff. But Charlie Russell was my idol as an artist. And we tend to romanticize all of our artwork. I know I do. I've got a painting of about 10 cowboys on horseback, and it's a gathering. And the boss he's got his hand up like this, and he's pointing the direction that they're going to take the remuda out to get the cattle. And you look at that, and people who haven't lived that life or been around it, they say, well, what's he pointing at? And I said, well, he's just telling these guys we're going to go down the trail out this way and try to find the cattle. So when you have to explain it to someone that they haven't ever lived that life, it's okay. But if you've lived that life, you look at that thing. Okay, I know exactly what's happening, you know. But that's what it is with artwork.
It's like when you did your roping 101, explaining that particular what was the?
It's called the twisted wrist.
Right.
The hula hand, where the
that's it.
Give the rope a twist. And I usually, when I sing that song, that was the first song I remember learning when I was in the 3rd grade in summer school. And so when you talk about going to Montana to throw the hula hand, maybe they don't want to know what it is, but I feel like I like to explain that it's a particular rope throw that's very difficult to do. When he's on stage, he's Sourdough Slim.
Yep.
But when you're talking to him, when he's off stage, he's just a nice guy. You know, he's a sweetheart of a guy. You know, really like Sourdough. And I don't know his real story. I know that he did give up a career to do what he's doing, and it works for him. He's entertaining, and he gets a lot of kick out of doing that stuff. You know, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
I've told you he always gives 100, if not 110%.
Oh yeah, at least that.
I've never seen a bad show with him.
Yeah. How we met Old West, the trio we had last night at the ranch. Marie and I had gone to a little party on a ranch down here in Amador County, and it was a sort of a cowboy night, and we saw Old West. They were entertaining. They were the entertainers, and they had just the back of a chuck wagon. They didn't have a real wagon, but they had the back chuck box sitting on sawhorses out there, and they had a little campfire going, and Old West was singing some songs, and I told Maria, I said, "Oh God, I'd like to get to know these guys. It's, you know, it's good stuff, really good stuff." So afterwards, we talking to him, and we thought, well, we'd like to do something together with you guys, and so we had this thing down here in Sutter Creek at the old theater, and we put together a little evening of cowboy music at the theater, and it was a sold-out night, and they rarely got sold-out nights. If they got 20 people at a show, they were tickled to death, but we filled the theater up, and Sourdough was there, and Old West, and I got to sing a couple songs, and it just went so well, and we got to talking afterwards. We ought to do this somehow. We ought to just, we didn't know where we was going to do it at the time, but when they finally decided we'd do it right here at the ranch, and I think our first crowd was about 30 people. It scared us to death. That's too many people to deal with. But it's evolved to this point, and it is. It's such a pleasure to. Our audiences are always with us 100%. They're good audiences. I don't know. We just the entertainers, if they don't have to go back home, they'll stay with us overnight here at the ranch, and we'll go out to breakfast. And it's always been such a pleasure to know these people. And they're good people. They're interested in America and the Americana way of life, and something that seems to be disappearing in so many places. That I always start out anytime I'm involved in a show. We do Cowboy Church here in Fiddletown. We always do God Bless America first. That's part of what we do, because I've been around long enough to see how America is losing some of the things that they're not teaching kids, things like God Bless America in church, in school anymore. They're not learning that. They're learning other things, not to be patriotic and not to love your country, and for whatever flaws it has, it's my country, and I love it dearly. And I don't want to lose that. And it seems like in some places we're losing so much of that. We went across the United States in a covered wagon back in 1976. And to travel that way, maybe 20 miles a day, on a good day, you find what good people the American people are. We'd be going, for instance, we'd go along in Kansas one day, and it's kind of Kansas had a lot of rain, and it's flat, and all the things that Kansas is, but there were people. The people there were such nice people. We'd be going along and down the road. Sometimes we're on narrow highways, and sometimes we're on old dirt roads. But we happened to be on this particular day. We were on the pavement going along, and we had about 9 wagons on our train, maybe 25, 30 people on horseback, and some cars come along and pulled up in front of us and stopped. When we caught up to them, they said, "You guys got some time? You'd like to stop and have some ice cream?" They had made this hand-cranked ice cream and apple pie, and we just sat there alongside the road and had this great conversation with these people, and they were just interested in what we were doing, and they came and bothered to do that. And this happened all along the way. People would come out and see what we were doing. Now, if you're traveling across the country in a car, you don't get this. But in a wagon, you're an oddity. And you're not scary. You're not dangerous. You're just people going along, and you're doing what you do. So people were always curious about what we were doing. And I was driving a big team of mules. And we had mules and horses, and we had runaways, and we had all sorts of interesting things happen. Every day was an absolute adventure, and it took us 6 months to get from the west coast to the east coast down the Santa Fe Trail. Well, I never had to commute much in my life, but I got a job restoring an old building down in Sacramento, which meant I had to commute and drive that trip down there and make it back into its old style Victorian look. And it took about 6 months, and I said, I'll never, ever commute again if I can ever do something. I decided, well, a friend of mine is a wagon collector here in Fiddletown, so I told him what I was going to do, and he said, well, I've got a wagon that needs restored. Would you do that? And I said, sure. So I brought it up here, and I restored it, and while I was restoring it, he was very happy with it, so he happened to be in the museum in Placerville, and they had a stagecoach sitting over there that they wanted restored. So I said, okay, They called me up and said, would you make a stab at restoring this stagecoach? And I said, I'd love to. So they brought it over here, and the coach belonged to the Native Sons of the Golden West, and so I invited the old guys to come over here every Saturday and watch the progress of the coach, tearing it down and finding the numbers. Built by Abbott and Downing out of Concord, New Hampshire, and they always numbered their coaches, and so there was a record kept of the coaches. The Smithsonian had all the records from Abbott and Downing out of Concord, New Hampshire. So I found the number on this coach under one of the jump seats, and they sent back to the Smithsonian, and they said, this number such and such. Do you have any records of this coach? They said they did. It was built for the one of the hotels on the East Coast. So the guys who owned this coach, the guys come over here, and I'd build a campfire, and we'd have coffee every Saturday morning and sit around and talk about the coach. So the head guy that said, do you mind if I talk to some television stations about what you're doing here? And I said, sure, go ahead. So he took some pictures and gave it to him, and that got out on the news that I was building wagons, and boy, I started getting calls. I couldn't have bought the advertisement that one little thing did, just because it was a unique business. I finished the coach, found out what color it was by getting down around where the painted and protected by the grease, and it was painted yellow. So, and they said on the Smithsonian record that it was painted, they called it sunshine yellow. or perfect yellow, one of those colors. Sure enough, so I painted it back the color it was originally, matched the paint, and did all the design work on the coach that was done originally. So it just got started, and it evolved because one person asked me to restore his coach, and that got on some of the news channels down in Sacramento, and I was sometimes 2 years behind because I was getting so much work. And I had a big team of mules here, and I was doing a lot of logging around here with my mules and building wagons in between and staying right here at the ranch. I didn't have to do the commute. My commute was from the house out to the barnyard about 150 feet. And I liked that commute. That worked real well for me. And still, after all these years, that's my commute, is from the house to the barnyard. And right now I'm working on a stagecoach, a 12-passenger Concord coach, doing all the artwork on it that was gold leafing and all the things that they did in those days. The shops, when the coaches came out of the shops, they were they shone in the sun like a diamond. They were just beautifully painted. Didn't take long on these old trails coming out west. It didn't take long to get dusty and grimy and beat up pretty well from the weather, but they came out of the shop beautiful.
Let me ask you one technical question.
Sure.
Because I know they have ball bearings.
No.
Well, I thought around the axle they actually...
No, all you have is the end of the axle is tapered, with a little groove in the top. And inside the hub is called a boxing. You got steel and cast iron for the boxing, which is a good bearing. You take the wheels off every day, throw a little more grease on there, put it back on. Bearings didn't come in till much later. All the old coaches I bring around here, none of them are bearinged. It's all just grease.
Then why are the wheels so big and thin?
The larger the wheel, the easier the coach rolls over rough ground. And people ask, why are the wheels smaller in the front than they are in the back? Well, to begin with, the way the axles and the things called the hounds and the bolsters take up more room in the front because it's a turning radius, so you have to make the wheels smaller so the body sits level. Because the wheels are smaller in the front, that gives you more turning radius. If the wheels are large in the front, you can't turn as sharp. And a stagecoach are top heavy because a lot of the people traveling on dusty roads, if you got 6 horses out in front, that puts a lot of dust into the coach, inside the coach. That's why everybody wore dusters. But if you got up on top of the coach, you were out of some of the dust. Concord coaches were top heavy to begin with. You could roll them over real easy, but with people, maybe 12 people up on top of the coach, they were really top heavy. But traveling by coach, you really had to want to go there. The springs were called leather. They were called thoroughbraces. They're made out of bullhide leather, and they were strung between uprights on the front and the back axles. And the body was rocked, and people would get really seasick in these coaches. They tended to roll and rock. And many layers about that thick of bullhide, about 4 inches wide. You get maybe 60, 70 miles a day at a nice brisk trot, maybe 8, 10, 12, 15, sometimes 20 miles between stations where they have to change the teams and put on a fresh set of teams and then go to the next station, however far it was, depending on the terrain.
Now, Tom told me, like this one behind you, the standard buckboard you see in Hollywood has the spring seats.
Yeah.
But this is actually how it was, just a rigid. They didn't have any soft tails. It was.
No, it beats you to death. It just pounds you. Later, when they started, then they figured out how to temper the springs so that they would spring like this. They could put springs on, but a dead axle wagon is called a wagon. A dead axle means there's no springs at all. It's just every bump you feel it. And a lot of the wagons were built that way and just pound you to death along the trails. The pioneers coming west all rode dead axle wagons, no springs at all, and most of them walked. They didn't ride in the wagons. They would drive from the ground with G and Haw, which would right and left. Teams were trained. They start out with oxen, but oxen you maybe get 10 miles a day because they walked very slow. And the Indians could stampede oxen just so easy, and they'd put them in camp at night and circle the wagons around, so that was their corral. But the Indians could come in and stampede them out of there, and they would be out there with no way to pull their wagons. And then they went to horses, and of course that was wealth to the Indians. The more horses they had, the more wealthy they were. And sometimes they went to mules. Well, the Indians didn't want mules because they're a little more cantankerous and a lot smarter than horses. So they stayed with the horses. A lot of things that went along the early pioneers, they really had to come here. They really wanted to be here. Of course, the gold rush brought a lot of people here that wouldn't have come otherwise. And they came either around the Horn by sailing ship, which took forever, or came across country in wagons, however they could get here, or stagecoaches. Took a long time, and you really had to want to be there. And that's part of the history that keeps it fascinating to me. I keep finding things that I read about travel, diaries that were kept by people who traveled that way. Mark Twain wrote a great story about his trip west in a stagecoach. I don't know where you'd find it because I just happened to find it in a book that I read, a copy of his diaries coming west, and how the food was and how the travel was and the people he met along the way. And as Mark Twain could do, he could make it into a humorous situation.
Well, I always thought it was interesting, that Mark Twain, he left his mark with a jumping frog, and he really spent very little time in the gold country.
Very little time, yeah.
He was coming from Virginia City to San Francisco. And
supposedly he had a little cabin up here. I don't know if he actually did stay in it at all, but everybody says he stayed in there a little while. But Virginia City, of course, he was in the newspaper up there, and all of his writings, he was such a humorist that you wonder how much of, when it comes to humor, you wonder how much is true. Because to make a little incident, I do this myself. You take a little incident and you enlarge on it and make it into a funny story. Or otherwise, maybe the story itself, if you tell it exactly the way it wasn't funny, And you can find some humor in that story that makes it into a interesting story. Yeah. And I think a lot of Mark Twain's writings were that way. He had that ability to bring out the humor in a otherwise bad situation. Yeah. Well, I read a story called The Log of a Cowboy, and it was written, he came on the early trails right after the Civil War, came west and got involved in the early trails trading cattle from Mexico up into Montana, Wyoming, and Kansas. And it wasn't flowery, it was just telling it as it is. The toughness and the swimming the rivers when the cattle didn't want to go into the water, but they'd force them into the rivers, and they had to trail these herds, and they had a date they had to be there, and they had to arrive with so many cattle. And I think a lot of maybe Lonesome Dove was sort of written from that well-written story. But he wrote it as an older man after, he lived it in the 1860s and 70s, but he wrote it as an older man. And so his memory was really well done. He did a beautiful job. It's called Log of a Cowboy. I don't even remember the name of the author now. It's been years ago I read it.
Well, while we're on it, besides Lonesome Dove, give me a couple of your favorite westerns.
Lonesome Dove. Yeah. And Cowboy, which was a good story about kids that were hired to get these cattle going through, and that was a John Wayne movie.
Before I forgot to ask you your favorite artists. Like Sourdough loves the music from the 20s and the 30s. You obviously love Gene Autry and all the classics. Can you just name?
Well, Sons of Pioneers was, fortunately, when we came back to California, we lived in Southern California, and Mom would take us boys into Los Angeles, quite a drive. But she'd take us to the radio show. They were on the radio a half hour every day. And she took us into town to the radio show. And we went to see the Sons of Pioneers maybe 3 or 4 times. And this was some of the original Sons of Pioneers were still there. And they sung some of the very favorite songs that I grew up loving to hear on the radio. And then we saw them in person. They became my favorite at that time. And they still are. They still are one of my very favorite group. And like a lot of groups, they would change. And the guys would find other businesses they got involved in. And I still like to hear their songs. I still sing some of their songs. I sang a couple of them last night when we were entertaining. And just good stuff. Well written. They did a lot of semi-religious music too, which hardly would go over nowadays, I guess, on the radio, because it, it has a religious sound.
Well, God bless you, Ron. I want you to live to be 100 in good health.
I'm planning on it.
Okay. What do you see going forward with the campfire? Do you just want to carry on? And
well, as far as I'm concerned, like last night, for instance, I wasn't ready to be the last show of the season. I just love it, because our audiences are so complimentary, and you can see by their faces they're enjoying what's happening, and hear the laughter out in the audience. And when Mark Twain was telling his stories, you could hear that laugh, that rolling laughter, that the people are right there with you. You know that they're absolutely being entertained. And I would like to keep doing this. At 82, I think if I could do this another 10 years, and then maybe think about maybe not doing this as much. Mom lived to be almost 102, and Dad made it to 94, and I thought, okay, I've got good genes that way. If I don't do something, because I'm still working, and I still trip over things, and
land the barbed wire fence.
Land the barbed wire fence. What's funny about that? I'm up here alone. Nobody around. And if I trip over something, I get up and look around and see if anybody saw me. And I know good and well he didn't, but it's the reaction you get, But I just love this way of life, and I hope to continue to sing songs and make paintings of the old cowboys and the things that they did in those days, and build wagons, and keep that old West alive that I love so dearly. That's why I live in the West. I found out on our trip across the United States that I'm glad I was born out here in California. It's about as far west as you're going to get in this country. I like to go down once in a while my daughter lives in Santa Cruz, and right on the coast. I'll just go out there and stand right on the edge of our continent, and remember that I went all the way across to the other edge of the of our North American continent, and I think this is my country. This is where I live. This is where I'm proud of what we've done in this country and who we are. I want to keep that pride. So my part is to keep that which inspired me about our country, keep that alive as much as possible. And, start out singing. My song is always God Bless America, because that's my sort of a prayer to what I want to see in this country. It's a good place. There's good people here. And if I can do my part, keep it going, that's what I'm here for.